2 p.m. on the button here in Moscow. The headlines from RT International. The deadline looms for talks on Iran's nuclear program today. 6 world powers and Tehran have until tonight to finalise any possible deal. Coming up to civilian casualties mount in airstrikes in Yemen as the Saudi-led coalition steps up its military intervention there. And Czech activists rage over an American military drive-through parade in Prague. Hello and a very good afternoon from me, Kevin Owen. If you just joined us, thanks for choosing RT International. First on this hour, diplomats from 6 world powers and Iran are racing today to try to meet a Tuesday deadline for that deal on Tehran's nuclear program. The sides are desperate for a breakthrough after marathon talks that so far have lasted almost 18 months. Here's what some of the main players are saying then so far today.
هنوز در موقعیتی نیستیم که بگیم نزدیک به حل این مسائل هستیم ولی امیدوار هستیم و به تلاش ادامه.
Selbst dann, wenn man das Gipfelkreuz schon vor Augen hat.
The work of the last weeks has been very positive, but still there are some points on which we have to work hard.
Oh, it's going on very well.
Very well.
So mixed messages there. Daniel Bushell reports now that on the last day of these big negotiations in Switzerland.
From what diplomats are telling us here at the Beau Rivage Hotel where talks take place, it looks like they're ready to keep negotiating till the early hours of Wednesday in a final push for a deal. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov has left for a meeting in Moscow but is now coming back later today on signs an agreement can be reached.
Chances of reaching a deal are high. Perhaps they're not 100%, since there is never a 100% certainty in anything. But these chances are good as long as no one raises the stakes at the final moment, hoping to get something extra, instead of just keeping the balance of interests.
Here's what's at stake. For Obama, sign his administration can achieve top-level diplomacy and end 35 years of hostility and mistrust between Iran and the States. For the world, a deal can finally stop the 12-year standoff over Iran's nuclear program. But this is what still has to be agreed. Western nations want strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities for at least a decade. Tehran demands all the crippling sanctions against its population be lifted immediately once the agreement is signed. But the West claimed it's better to lift them gradually. And if Iran breaks the terms of the deal, the US and its allies want all suspended sanctions straight back. We'll be keeping close eye on negotiations throughout the day, and we'll bring you the latest.
Yeah, correspondent in Lausanne there. Well, America, of course, has been labouring hard for a deal despite criticism from its allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel. The Obama administration is also facing staunch opposition at home from the Republicans who already want to impose more sanctions on Tehran. In fact, in an interview with CNN, House Speaker John Boehner was asked how quickly congressional Republicans could potentially impose new restrictions on Iran if no agreement's reached today. Boehner's answer was concise and short. It was very, very quickly. And to obstruct a possible deal too, Senator John McCain suggested that Israel should even, quote, go rogue on Tehran if it needs to. But Jamal Abdi, policy director of the National Iranian-American Council, is upbeat and believes the outcome in Lausanne could exceed expectations today.
I'm pretty confident we're going to see a deal. I don't think the parties have gone this far and really resolved this much. I mean, this thing is almost done in order to see a collapse. Now I think we have a window here where you have the new Iranian president, you have Obama with 2 years left. The stars have sort of aligned, but it's all hinged on this one issue. That is not even the totality of the issues between the two countries, but this nuclear issue. And if we can fix the nuclear issue, we might begin to turn the page and shift the paradigm and see increased positive, opportunities for diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran and other states in the region.
Well, as Daniel was saying just now, we'll be closely following negotiations in Switzerland and keeping you fully up to date on air and online as well, RT.com.
Right here.
So we'll see where we go.
The Saudi-led coalition is stepping up airstrikes against Shia militants in Yemen. That's the latest, some of the latest pictures we've had back from there. Warplanes targeting a ballistic missile storage depot in the rebel-held capital Sana'a. Elsewhere in the country, airstrikes against militant positions saw bombs falling on a refugee compound. Aid workers say at least 45 people were killed there, including women and children. Despite the mounting civilian casualties, those Saudi diplomats are defending the military intervention.
The use of force in Yemen is to defend the legitimate government and protect the people of Yemen.
A top human rights official says it's the civilians who are paying the price for the military conflict, though.
Yemen is something of a humanitarian catastrophe at the moment for a whole host of reasons, the latest being this Saudi-led air campaign. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, frankly, certainly the poorest country in the Arab world. I think it is a very bleak picture, and it's really hard to see what good could possibly come out of this campaign. It's really difficult to see how the government of Mr. Hadi could possibly be restored under these circumstances.
Well, 10 countries answered the Yemeni president's plea for military intervention when he asked. Dozens of airstrikes against the Shia militants have been carried out since last week. According to Houthi officials, at least 180 people have already been killed. Coming up here on Arts International, a scandal at a US strawberry festival after a poster of the event showing 2 Afro-American children is deemed racist. Also ahead as well, RT visits an outpost in East Ukraine where a joint Ukrainian-Russian observer team is on the lookout for any ceasefire violations. We catch up with them. A US Army unit's parade through Eastern Europe has provoked scuffles in Prague. Scores of activists came out to protest the convoy's passage through the city. At least one person was arrested when police stepped in to protect the American troops.
Go home! Army, go home! Army, go home!
You killed all my neighborhoods!
Army, go home! Army, go home! Army, go home!
Well, the US forces are on their way still back to base in Germany after military drills near the Russian border. But instead of catching a fast trip by train, as would be more normal, the Americans this time decided to roll through several NATO countries over the last week. They've made stops along the way to show off their military muscle to locals too. The official purpose of the American road trip is to reassure Washington's allies in the face of a perceived threat from Russia. But anti-war activist Richard Becker says it's the US forces who are coming across as a menace.
I think it's clearly a provocation, and I had just recently seen a YouTube video showing that the A-10 Warthog planes were flying over one part of this convoy that's going through Eastern Europe. And clearly, this is an aggressive step, another aggressive step by the United States and by NATO, but particularly by the United States. And it was the U.S. Army General Hodges, who's in charge of the U.S. Army in Europe, who came up with this plan. And, you know, it's not Russia that's been the aggressor in this situation. It's the United States and NATO trying to absorb Ukraine to move closer and closer right up to the critical border of Russia that's created the crisis that we're seeing.
An email blunder has left Australia's immigration department